All right, welcome back, everyone. Our next presenter is a physician, cartoonist, and author. She completed her undergrad education at Washington University and is currently a cardiology fellow at University of Chicago. A regular contributor to Medscape's lifestyle column and a creator of narrative comics on topics such as healthcare disparities, medical training, and identity. I am so pleased to present Shirlene Obuobi, whose talk is entitled Comics as a Tool for Self-Reflection and Expression.
Awesome, thank you so much for the introduction, Nika. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So as Nika kindly said, my name is Shirlene. I'm currently a first-year cardiology fellow, a cartoonist. I had a platform called Shirley World MD and writer, and I want to talk today about comics in the context of graphic medicine. So before I get started, I want to talk a little bit about the functions of art in general. So when I was in college, someone actually brought this up to me. They said there are 6 functions of art. And so when I was creating this presentation, I scored the internet to try to find them again, could not find them anywhere until I stumbled upon Professor Weisman's presentation, where she describes the functions of art as the following: for delight, commentary, worship, and ritual, commemoration, persuasion, and final self-expression. So I'll be going back to this slide fairly frequently just to talk about my comics and work kind of relate to this. So I am a cartoonist, I draw comics, and people often ask why comics. I think for a very long time, although this is now changing, comics were considered something that was a little bit more juvenile, not potentially literary. And in my opinion, comics are powerful because of their ability to combine. So while images they can reference events and reference really provide. And with comics, however, you can add a textual component, and that helps to guide interpretation more effectively if there's a particular message you're trying to get across. So combined, they make for this incredibly efficient way of really relaying information in a world that is very information heavy. And nowadays, and I'm not keeping myself out of this, I have a short attention span. I want to get information very quickly, very snappily. And with comics, you can do that. So just to kind of pull back, as I said, I'm a physician. And so to start with this, I always think about what a doctor looks like and what do people generally think of when they think of a doctor. And a lot of times they're imagining, the Leonardo DiCaprio type in Catch Me If You Can. That's the whole reason why he was able to pass as a physician, despite having no medical knowledge, was kind of his phenotype, right? We think of House, George Clooney, not necessarily someone who looks like me, who is a Black woman. I have locks, which are often considered unprofessional depending on where you are. I'm very unambiguously Black, and so I by making myself the main character of my comics, I really want to challenge people's motif of what a doctor is in their head, right? So that after a while they get used to seeing, oh, like this character is a physician and she's a Black woman, but she's also a physician, so they can tie those two things together. The next question is, how does a doctor behave? So I'm going to stop talking for about 2 seconds so we can watch this clip from Grey's Anatomy, everyone's favorite medical show.
Dr. Obuobi, a couple of things.
Yes.
I think you need to share your sound on your computer because we're not hearing the video, we're just seeing it.
Oh no! Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you want to start over again? Okay. And the other thing is your
yes.
internet connection is a little spotty, so you're kind of skipping a little. I don't know if you can have any control over that. We'll just roll with it, but yeah.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, sorry guys. I had to leave my house in a rush because my internet was down there too. So I think it may be all of Hyde Park
Yeah.
that's suffering.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So
I'm
you
not
know
entirely sure. It's okay. You know what? I'll just tell, oh, here's a share sound. And what I can do is I can walk out into a public area. It's just that you guys might get other people's talking as well. So sorry about that. Let's see
okay.
whether this
It
works.
happens.
Let's try here. We don't have to watch the whole thing.
Hey, whoa, hold on. Talk to me.
Stop. Fix him. Let him die. Let him lie there and die. Do you want me to shoot you? Stop fixing him!
No. No. Jackson, plant the hilum so you can get control of the hemorrhage so I can get better visualization.
Don't you dare.
All right, so in this clip, we have Christina Yang from Grey's Anatomy. And even when she's at gunpoint, she has a certain level of commitment to her patient, commitment to her job. She's a true hero. She's continuing, moving on with the surgery, even at great risk to herself. And I think this is a lot of times what we hear about when we talk about how physicians should necessarily behave. You're supposed to be noble and self-sacrificing, above it all, which an objective, and a lot of times this reads as apolitical. And work is always exciting. Healthcare workers are heroes, right? But the truth is, often the reality is that we're human and we're tired, in need of balance with the work and life. And the outside world actually does heavily influence our ability to work. And often the work can be monotonous, it can be demoralizing, it can be draining. And so in light of all this, if feeling this way sometimes, feeling not necessarily that that my job was always the most rewarding thing in the world, sometimes also feeling out of place due to different aspects of my identity and even my interests, made me sometimes feel like a black sheep. And that is a lot of what drew, kind of going back to this functions of art slide, me to creating comics in the graphic medicine field. So when I initially started, I really was intending I was creating comics for delight, so wanted to make myself and my classmates laugh, and for self-expression. And so my initial comics usually that I started in my third year of medical school are based off of this. They're just highlighting small experiences that I was having. This was my very first one in my third year of medical school, which is just as simple as running into my classmates on the floor. It was not considered professional to necessarily go say hi to them when you were on different teams. So we would just stare at each other intensely and have a moment of camaraderie as we passed, right? Or something as small as getting out of the hospital early because my resident has released me, after a long day. And what was really rewarding about those early comics is that was the feedback that I started getting, so that people were saying, "Oh, wait, this is my experience," or even sometimes more powerfully, "This is not exactly my experience, but it's close." And so, let me share mine. So initially, the comics were created as a way for self-reflection, and over time, really, it created a window to look outward to see what other people were experiencing and what other stories were not necessarily being told. So because of this, the platform started to evolve, and the function started to switch a little bit from less just self-expression and delight to more commentary about certain experiences. So things as simple as, in clinical medicine, a significant amount of time, I wrote 30%, this is back when I was early, either in residency or at late medical school, but honestly, it's probably more than 60-70% of time is spent on documentation, writing notes, et cetera, and maybe not so much on active patient care, not so much on listening to patients and hearing their stories, and even coming up with diagnoses, right? And more on this stuff that maybe is less important for the human connection, more important for billing, right? Other things, in this particular comic, I'm reflecting on my perspectives on codes during either when I was in medical school versus when I had to run codes as a resident, and how I used to think that people were very cavalier and casual about someone dying right in front of them, and how, with some time and having to be immersed in that, I came to really understand why healthcare workers often have these reactions that may seem callous to people from the outside, and how much of that may just be coping, because as I said before, healthcare workers and physicians are really asked to put on this very stoic, noble, very impartial perspective, but we're still humans, and so how those emotions often come out after the day is over, and all these different ways, right? And how they spill over, and these perspectives and these experiences were things that people could relate to. And as things kind of went along, I started shifting a little bit further into talking about really the issues, right? So the first thing was kind of observing and reflecting. And afterwards, it came like, look, there's some things that are genuinely like that we genuinely need to fix, and genuinely need to change to make medical training more humane, to make things better for our patients, et cetera. And so and this is largely because many experiences, even though like my intention initially may have just been to share experiences or to reflect, are inherently political. And so, for example, in this comic, I'm discussing the effect of the minority tax, and the minority tax being the kind of implicit set of requirements, expectations that come with being an underrepresented minority, or coming from a marginalized identity and joining academic institutions, right? Like, so there's aside from the talk about how we may or may not be deserving of our positions, there's also an expectation that we'll recruit the next generation, or expectations that if we underperform, it may affect the ability of others from our same identity groups to come follow us, or maybe potentially like the trauma that comes with having to experience microaggressions, macroaggressions during training, all of those things kind of adding up and not necessarily being like accounted for when we are talking about ability to succeed in these institutions, right? And so given that, because of so many of these experiences are inherently political, some of this, my commentary started shifting more towards, okay, how do we fix things? How do we talk about these things, right? And persuading people to care about these issues, care about things like health equity. And so what I started transitioning to, and this is like really leaning more heavily towards the textual component of comics and why I love them, is adding clear messages and or calls to action in order to encourage people to delve into some advocacy, right? And so this particular comic, I think if I were doing it now, it wouldn't be so text dense, but it's talking about, in a lot of medical school training, one thing that we hear over and over again is that, Black patients have higher incidences of disease or higher morbidity, mortality, without necessarily talking about why that happens, right? And really talking about making it honestly, implicitly seem as though there's something broken about the Black body, rather than really acknowledging the fact that, race is not like a very strong genetic factor. It's really something that is more socially driven, right? Like in that, especially in America, where we have like it's really not tied to genetics, right? Like there's a one drop rule here. The one thing that's unifying for Black Americans is really the racism that they experience, right? And how we have to acknowledge that when we're talking about this, so that we don't create this idea that really we're so biologically distinct. Like a huge group of people is biologically distinct, right? So that this particular comic gained a lot of traction and started a lot of conversations within the medical community to really revisit and rethink how we talk about this topic. And so one question I get asked very, very frequently is, I'm talking about sensitive issues. I'm often talking about all the isms, sexism and misogyny and racism and all of these things that are in the healthcare field. And I think especially amongst physicians, I think some other groups of healthcare workers are better at this, but amongst physicians, we don't like talking about, right? Because we're supposed to be apolitical and impartial. So how do I talk about these things and attempt to persuade people to care about them without offending them? And the real answer is I don't. I will always offend someone. People will see what they want, but I have some strategies to try to mitigate these reactions. And one of them is this. Like I said, I almost always try to speak from experience, right? I draw from experiences. I don't try to, and it's really hard when from your own experience to tell you that they didn't experience something. They still do it. But it's a little difficult, and when you're just being true to yourself and being true to your story. The other strategy I often take is I present myself as fallible, right? So like I'm not, I myself am not somehow immune to committing or to treating people in ways that are biased, etc. So, for example, in this comic where I'm talking about how we treat, say, like our white and our wealthier patients, our VIP patients, quote unquote, as though they can go wrong, versus our Black, especially Black male patients, patients from marginalized backgrounds, who, when they get a little bit heated, we're very quick to turn to security and to use punitive measures. I draw myself into that, right? To show that, I'm not immune from that kind of behavior. And therefore, harm people, talking about group of people. The strategy I use is I use these guys. So my most recurring character is purple guy has he represents institution cultures, and I doll him up sometimes in his own white coat, sometimes he has beards, like all sorts of things are happening.
Oh no. I think Shirlene might have dropped off.
Oh, I see her. She's here. I think the spotlight is.
You're muted, Shirlene.
Yeah, I unmuted myself. I think I got kicked off somehow. Sorry, guys. Can everyone hear me again? Okay,
Yeah,
still
you're good.
spotlighted? Okay,
Yep,
excellent.
you're good.
All right.
Mhm.
All right, so purple guy. No distinguishing features. He represents institutions, cultures that can be dolled up to so that I can narrow down the point that I'm trying to make. I also have my coverage cobra. So coverage cobra always represents healthcare companies. And if you follow me or you know anything, you gotta already know my feelings about them. So our insurance companies. So by using these characters who don't look like anybody in particular, I'm able to address issues without necessarily pointing fingers a little bit more effectively. And they always say, so like to help people focus on the message, they always say, like hit dogs holler. Like if you identify with purple guy, it's not because I called you out, it's because something is, so you're relating to him a little bit much. And so here's some examples of when I use this character. On the left side, I'm talking about professionalism, the whole concept of that within the medical establishment. And this one, I drew this comic shortly after, if you guys keep up with any of the controversy online, there was an article published in a urology journal that went through female trainees' Instagrams and social media pages and reported them as unprofessional, recorded them as unprofessional if they had pictures of themselves in bathing suits. Or it also noted anything that was advocating for gay pride or LGBTQ issues or for Black Lives Matter is also as unprofessional, quote unquote. And the purpose of Purple Guy here is really to represent all the many attendings and physicians and people in powerful places who behave in unprofessional manners that kind of get away with them because of what we've decided we've accepted and because of their place in the hierarchy. On the right, I'm talking about, I'm kind of contrasting the treatment of patients with cystic fibrosis and those with sickle cell anemia, by healthcare workers at large, and how there's one group of people who gets a lot of funding, and has a lot of research into their pathophysiology, and another group where honestly, like if you're in an emergency room anywhere, basically, that serves sickle cell patients or patients with sickle cell disease, you'll hear some pretty terrible things in medication often. So putting both of these are just examples of how I use my purple guide to really address some issues. And I get to be a little bit spicier with him, right? Because he doesn't look like anybody, right? And so if it's very much like people bring their own context and can imply on who they think this person is supposed to represent. And it's the same thing with my coverage Cobra. Like I said, I only ever speak from experience. I personally am I advocated for a long time for single payer, but I only talk about the experiences I've had as in my, I guess, 4 years now of being a physician, and my experiences engaging with healthcare insurance companies, and how many times I find dealing with them to be kind of obstructive to patient care. And so, but by bringing this in, and like I don't include anything else, I invite other people to also talk about their experiences. And also, since I have a good number of people who are not in the healthcare field, and people who are patients, so they can see kind of what barriers face their providers when they're trying to get them care. The last strategy I employ often is I change my style depending on what I'm trying to achieve with different comics. So one thing I do fairly frequently is switch into this black and white, more realistic style. This particular comic, which I entitled Mirrors, was intended to really encourage institutions once more, huh?
You're spotlit again, so go ahead and yeah.
Great. I'm almost done, so.
Okay, yeah.
All right. So it's to encourage medical institutions to really try to recruit more Black students, and not just to recruit them, but also to provide supportive spaces for them to thrive in, and help provide guidance. And so when I'm talking about these kinds of issues, I will sometimes switch my style, because my colorful style is meant to be a little often tongue-in-cheek. It's meant to like sometimes at least inspire, if not a laugh, like a and this helps me inform my audience that I'm trying to go for a tonal shift. I'm trying to be a little bit more serious, and so that is another strategy that I often employ. So that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for your patience, and sorry about the internet struggles. I'll take any questions if there's time.
Can you unshare your screen real quick, Dr. Obuobi? Thanks.
Thank you, Shirlene. That was an incredible talk. I love the coverage Cobra and the purple guy. I think that was such a great way to visualize those concepts and institutions in a visual form. There's a lot of comments in the chat. I think we'll give a second for the questions to roll in. Jill asked, where can we see more of your work?
It's mostly on social media. So Instagram and Twitter under Shirley Whirl MD is where I generally post all of my comics. I write too. I have a book coming out through HarperCollins in June. And so if you are interested in that, it's called On Rotation.
And okay, let's see. Michael asks, who are some of your comic heroes and who inspires you?
So I've been a comic dweeb for a very long time, and so Scott McCloud was like his Bible. was my comic Bible for a really long time. I also when I'm talking from just the art aspect, Fiona Staples, very much obsessed with her artwork. I don't know, there's so many, but those are probably the two whenever I'm thinking about them, like most direct inspirations. Those are the two I care about as well. I love the most.
Awesome. Lisa asks, how do you balance your art with medical training? Good question.
It's a very good question. You know, the answer I give everybody is I kind of going back to the self-expression slide. If I wanted to be completely honest, it's a little bit of self-soothing and self-therapy too. So the answer is, do I balance it or do I find the time so that I can reflect and stay sane in the space? It's probably more the latter.
Yeah, I could take some time management tips from you. I can't imagine. Gail asks, does your black and white work relate to graphic novels?
So kind of. So it's a little bit more in the typical graphic novel style. And if someday I actually get around to doing a full novel and think that's probably what the style would look like. But it is it's generally trying to emulate that.
And Olivia asks, are there a few main reactions you get to your comics from your colleagues?
So yes, I mean, in general, I feel as though most of the time, the people who know me in real life have used my comics as a board to bounce off, to just have discussions with me about the topics I bring up in them. And so for the most part, most of it is curiosity, or if they relate to it, they find it funny, et cetera, et cetera. And in general, the reactions I get are just, they've just become conversation starters.
Yeah, and I also love how you bring like a lightheartedness to some of the topics too that can be difficult to discuss. So I think that it opens up a space to have conversations about those because it's in a comic form, which is seen as more like lighthearted. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like disarming and a little bit funny, so people tend to be, people relax when they're laughing.
Yeah. Let's see, Matt asks, how do people find you who want to tempt you into working on projects?
So the answer is, it's really hard to tempt me these days because cardiology fellowship is greedy. But you can always email me. It's shirleyworldmd@gmail.com, and every now and then I do bite.
Cool. Nicole asks, how do you find the energy to create when things like the pandemic are going on?
So, the pandemic, I was actually very, very productive during the pandemic because like I said, it was a time, it's an unprecedented time, not to be cliche, right? And being a trainee during the pandemic, especially at the time of the height of COVID, or I guess the first couple waves, I was an internal medicine resident. So I was in the wards, like in the COVID wards. I got deployed. I actually drew a black and white comic on that very topic. And I think that it was, for me, almost necessary to be able to process kind of what was going on, what I was seeing, what I was feeling. These were very complicated, complex feelings. So it's like I said before, it's not really finding the energy. It's kind of I needed to.
Yeah, almost like therapy in a way.
Exactly.
Eva May asks, are there any other doctor artists doing similar work that you know of that you might like to share?
Oh, there are so many of us. There's an entire graphic medicine community. When I say so many, I mean dozens. But I really enjoy, if you these would all be people who are on Instagram, etc. But some of them who aren't. I think Dr. Ian Williams was one of the first people to really, and then Michael Green were the ones to coin the term graphic medicine. And Ian Williams has a whole series of graphic novels. I think the first one's called The Bad Doctor, that are really, truly excellent. There's people like My Humorous Life, who's a radiology resident, who I've learned a lot about radiology through him, but other things as well. There's so many. Why am I blanking on them? Dr. War Games, who's a hospitalist. He's older. He's based in I'm forgetting where he's based in, but he often talks about healthcare system issues in his comics, kind of similar to how I do. There are a whole bunch. I can send you guys a list. Is he in Jacksonville? that sounds about right. So I can send you guys a list if you're interested.
Yeah, sure, definitely. And then she has a follow-up question. Do you depict people you work people you know work with in your comics do they know beforehand?
The only times I depict people who I work with and who I know are when it's in a complimentary light, and B, they've given me permission. And so otherwise, what I will often do if I do have an interaction, I'm not using purple guy because I'm intending to show like a specific person, I will, and for patients all the time, right? Because I do not want any patients to be identifiable. I definitely play a little bit of a mix the bag for their attributes. Like, so maybe if it doesn't matter for the interaction, especially if, for example, the interaction was with a male attending, I will make them a woman. Right? You know, I will do all sorts of things. I'll change their features. Sometimes that, especially earlier on, would get me in trouble because then people would incorrectly think it was that. But I try to avoid including real people as much as possible.
Well, and we have time for one last question. What platform do you use for creating the comics? I was actually wondering about this too.
You're wondering. I use my iPad and I use Procreate. And it's almost exclusive. I used to use Photoshop, but now I have to be a little bit more mobile because I don't have as much time to just sit with a tablet. So
it actually looked a little like Illustrator. So that's
sometimes
cool.
that's, yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. You have that graphic look with Procreate. I love that.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know if there's any more questions. I think we covered, there was another person that asked, how do you find the time? But I think that was a similar question that we answered earlier.
It's probably my most commonly asked question.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for your presentation. That was amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed this.